Chapter 19. To be or not to be. For a long time, Ari lay awake, starting at every real or imagined noise and rehearsing with painful clarity the evening's debacle. So often during these past years, he'd heard the reassuring sound of key grating against lock, signaling that Nicole had returned safely from a late night at the hospital. Now he listened in vain. If only he'd been more sympathetic, more sensitive. At last, sometime after midnight, he fell asleep. At 3 o'clock, he awoke with a start. In a panic, he realized that her side of the bed was still empty. She'd be sleeping on the couch, of course. But when he tiptoed quietly into the living room, it was empty. Should he call the police? He picked up the phone, then put it down. No, she'd probably stayed at a friend's house. She'd lay a guilt trip on him, teach him a lesson. He should have remembered past discussions, that she had wanted to have a baby and that he had always put her off. This pregnancy, even though unplanned, obviously meant a lot to her. He just wasn't the diplomatic type. Everything was so black and white to him, so obvious. That approach wouldn't work in this situation. He could see that. Still, she would eventually see the wisdom of getting an abortion. Having a child now was absolutely out of the question. There was still no sign of Nicole when he awakened again around 7:30 in the morning and got up to shave and shower. He was gulping down black coffee and day-old bread and gloomily pondering whether he should notify the university that he was unable to teach his class that day when he heard a key turning in the front door. Nicole! Should he rush to greet her? No, this night's pain had been her responsibility. Now it was up to her to explain herself and make the first move toward reconciliation. "Is that you, Nicole?" he called, unable to suppress his sudden relief. "No, it's just one of the burglars who have a key to the apartment," came the quick response. That typical retort was a good sign. Footsteps approached, and there she was, standing in the kitchen doorway. How very tired she looked. When their eyes met, Ari knew that time had not healed the hurt. "Where have you been?" Ari's voice shook. "I almost called the police." "I'm sorry. I should have phoned." "Well, I'm sorry, too. I was too abrupt. I should have given you time to think." As soon as the words were out, he knew he'd made things worse again, even before he saw her stiffen. "There's really nothing to think about," she responded quickly. "Abortion is totally unthinkable." She sat down wearily at the table. "Let's not start off arguing," pleaded Ari. "Can't we wait? I think you're still too upset to discuss this rationally." "I'm not arguing," countered Nicole, controlling her voice with great effort. "And I'm quite rational. There's no discussion. Period. I'm just stating the simple facts. There's a child growing inside of me, Ari. Our child, with our genes. It will look like us, have our traits. I love that child, and I'm going to keep it. So it has to be your way, without even hearing my side, no willingness to talk it over." Nicole stood to her feet. "You don't reason about something that's clearly wrong. You're talking about murder." "Terminating a pregnancy isn't murder," he retorted defensively. "But let's drop it for now, okay? Later." So that's how it becomes ethical. Even the mafia avoids the word murder. They talk about terminating someone. So you just want to terminate my pregnancy. I have another name for it. "You should have been a lawyer, Nikki. But please, not now. You need to get some sleep." "I had some sleep. Enough anyway. I have to be at the hospital in 40 minutes. Any calls?" "No." "Am I allowed to ask where you spent the night?" "After I left you, I ran into a couple from the hospital. He's chief of staff and she's a nurse. I desperately needed someone to talk to. And after we talked for a while on the street, I went home with them and we talked some more. It was too late to come back here. I think I settled a great deal last night." "Settled a great deal?" "A lot of things that I've wondered about for years fell into place. I do want to talk to you about all that, but I really must jump into the shower and get to the hospital." "Well, I'm glad you want to talk things over," responded Ari, brightening a bit. "I was in agony last night, imagining the emptiness of life without you." Nicole stood quietly in the doorway of the kitchen looking at Ari. He could see tears glistening in her eyes. I felt the same pain, she said at last, of being without someone I already love very much. Unconsciously, Nicky's hands touched her belly. Nicky, let's talk this out right now, he pleaded, sensing a growing chasm between them and changing his mind. Later, Ari, like you said. Please, there isn't time right now. I'm scheduled for surgery. She hurried from the room. Ari spent the day in a tumult of conflicting emotions. Would Nicole leave him? If she did, it was totally unjustifiable under the circumstances. Had she hinted that she was thinking about it? He couldn't remember her exact words, but it seemed a separation was implied by her inflexibility. That fear haunted him. In painful candor, he scrutinized their relationship. Looking back, he could see that he had too often taken her for granted. But then, wasn't that a natural concomitant of the perfect love and trust they'd had for one another? He sensed, uncomfortably, that perhaps it wasn't quite that simple. Clearly, he hadn't given her as much of himself as she deserved. He'd been driven by a passion that left little time for the loving sharing of life together that she longed for and that he really wanted to give her. She'd never complained. With a surge of emotion, Ari recalled the ever-ready sympathy she'd always been so quick to show, the encouragement when he was down. Was she ever down? It had never seemed so, but now he wondered. Were her unfailing good spirits more an act of love than a reflection of her true feelings? Could her pregnancy now have triggered resentments that had smoldered beneath the surface for months or even years? Guilt, self-justification, bittersweet memories chased each other in ever-broadening circuits through Ari's mind. What of those friends she talked it over with? How long had she known them? It seemed odd that she'd never mentioned them before. Obviously, they were the ones responsible for the strange way she was now thinking and acting. Yes, in some subtle way that he couldn't articulate, she seemed to be different. She'd been vulnerable, and they had taken advantage of her emotional state to brainwash her. There was some small comfort in believing that the cause of Nicky's stubborn narrow-mindedness lay in something outside the bounds of their relationship with each other. That was an important point to bring up tonight. With trepidation, Ari's thoughts turned to the evening's assignment. Would Nicole let him down? Surely not. She wouldn't let personal feelings stand in the way of something this important. She'd be at the cafe. If not, what would he do? When Ari arrived, he saw to his relief that Nicole was already seated at a choice outdoor table with a good view of the passing crowds. It was just the right spot for Carla, strolling by, to happen to notice him. Seeing the black handbag sitting on the pavement to her right, he took the chair to her left, giving her a light kiss on the cheek as he sat down. She endured it, but the warmth was missing. She was wearing his favorite perfume. Was that a good sign? For a brief moment, he felt the old intoxication, the rush of nostalgic memories associated with that aroma, but her coolness quickly sobered him. "Thanks for coming, Nicky," he said as he settled himself beside her, trying to be low-key. "I wouldn't let you down, Ari. I know how important this is to you. It could save my life someday." He cut that little speech short and changed the subject. "You look terrific, as usual." If he could only forge a link with the past, it would be a mistake to launch right into a heavy discussion. He'd chased her away last night. He'd be careful not to make the same mistake again. Ari waited for Nicky to say something in response, but she just sat quietly, seemingly absorbed in watching the passers-by. He could tell that her eyes were seeing nothing. Finally, he asked, "Did you get to the hospital on time?" "Yes." After another uncomfortable silence, he tried again. "Everything okay over there?" "Yes, everything's okay." The arrival of the waiter relieved the embarrassment for a moment. Nicole ordered her usual soup and salad. "Maybe I'll just go with that too," said Ari. Couldn't she see what she was doing to him? There was another long silence. At last, Ari said, "Look, Nicky, it's only making matters worse for us just to sit here and say nothing. And small talk is dishonest." "I'm willing to talk." "Well, you said you'd come to some important decisions last night and that you wanted to discuss them. Can we start there?" "Your friend will be here soon. Shouldn't we wait until after?" I can't wait. Please, what's going on in your head and heart? I'm afraid you're not going to like it, Ari. She paused, searching for words. Is it that bad? No, it's good, actually. The best for both of us, I think, in the long run at least. In the long run? What about right now? What are you going to do? Ari, I'm not the same person I was yesterday. It's difficult to explain. Things I used to believe no longer make sense, and other beliefs, solid ones, have taken their place. For one thing, I'm not an atheist anymore. Well, I never was, countered Ari, feeling relieved. At least she hadn't blurted out that she was going to leave him. So that's no problem, but I don't see what it has to do with our situation. But it does. Whether God exists has everything to do with it. I'm willing to concede that there's some creative force out there somewhere. So go on. You say you were never an atheist, Ari, but you weren't any more willing than I was to be morally accountable to God. Higher power, yes. Creative force, sure. But a personal creator who made us for a purpose and who sets the standards of morals and ethics, did you ever believe in that God? Really, Nikki, I find this irrelevant. No, it's very relevant. What we do is decided by what we think is right or wrong. But who decides that? Where do morals and ethics come from? That question always bothered me. Then I studied medicine and learned how intricately designed the human body is. Even a single living cell is more complex than all of Paris. We can't possibly be the product of chance. I don't have any problem with that, cut in Ari impatiently. Well, wouldn't right and wrong be equally a matter of God's design? Wouldn't He establish moral laws to govern human behavior, just as physical laws govern the material universe? Ari sighed with resignation. I don't see that this philosophical discussion is getting us anywhere. Ari, it's the crux of the problem. Right and wrong don't depend upon whether something's convenient or appealing to us. So you're going to tell me that God says abortion is wrong. Is that it? Nicole nodded. That's part of it. And now that you've got God on your side, I guess I'm outvoted 2-1. That's pretty tough opposition. You don't have to fight God, Ari. Her eyes were imploring him. Why not come over to His side? What do you mean, His side? You weren't on His side yesterday morning. How can you change sides so fast? Ari's bitter response was cut short as the waiter arrived with the soup. An embarrassing and frustrating helplessness swept over Ari. To philosophize, theorize, discuss on an impersonal level man's godlike propensities and potentials was one thing, but to stand exposed and vulnerable to the personal probing of this woman who had been his lover and was now a total stranger was intolerable. Nicole's eyes were pleading with Ari. What happened last night was that I came to the point where I was willing to swallow my pride and admit the truth. To myself first, and then to others. Ari was losing patience. We'd had a misunderstanding, he responded abruptly. You were vulnerable, in an emotional state where you were looking for simplistic answers. I was in an emotional state, said Nicole softly. That's true, but the rest of it isn't. I was seeking genuine answers, deeper and more honest than I'd ever been willing to face before in my entire life. And I thank God that my concern for the child inside me brought me to that point. You've become a religious fanatic, Nikki, in one night. I can't believe it. We've discussed the power of religious superstition, something that I forgot to factor into the equation, but I never thought you'd fall for it. It didn't all happen last night. I've wrestled with these questions for years. Last night was the culmination. The pieces finally all fell logically into place. I don't know of anybody of any intelligence who believes what you're trying to dump on me. I don't think I'm ignorant and uneducated or stupid. I'm not saying you are. It's because you aren't that I can't understand how you'd fall for this. Well, Ari, the man who very kindly gave me all the time I needed last night and prayed with me and counseled me from the Bible happens to be one of the most brilliant surgeons in the world. Certainly the intellectual equal of anyone I know, you or anyone else." Ari cut an expletive off in midair. "All right," he muttered. "Put this on hold. Here she comes."